Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for a really kind introduction. Yes, and my slides are working, I hope. Okay. Anyway, before I start, I wanted to just say a big thank you on behalf of INSEAD, the Emerging Markets Institute, to ACCA and to Deloitte for inviting us to be part of this very interesting and I think very topical discussion today. You've heard some very interesting and I think also slightly frightening points from the previous two speakers. And they can be frightening if you feel like your organizations are not really ready for the transformation to come. So I'm going to take a few minutes now to talk about this from a very different perspective. From the perspective of the people who will be working in the workplaces that are going to be so transformed by all of the things that the previous two speakers spoke about. Even as we talk about all of these technological transformations and revolutions and changes, there is another quieter but probably equally significant change that's also happening in the workplace. For the first time in history, multiple generations, which are quite different in many different ways, will be converging upon the workplace at the same time. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So of the generations that we speak about, the three youngest ones are probably the ones that you've heard the most about. They've been discussed to death. Lots has been said about Generation Y. I think that was an allusion already made, the much maligned and much spoken about millennials. When we talk about millennials, we break them up into two sectors, into two segments. The ones who are already working professionals and the ones who are university students who will soon become your problem when they come to your workforces. Then we have Gen X, which is the generation that I belong to, and I'd imagine at least half of you in the audience are probably a part of this generation, also beginning to take up really senior roles and influential decision makers in companies. And then there's Generation Z. And Tom spoke about the problems associated with millennials. I have to tell you that actually the millennials are probably all well settled. You have to worry about the Gen Zers that are going to come in very soon and start really causing disruption in the workplace. They're kids, they're in high school right now, but they will become your problem very soon before you realize it. So I want to make sure that you start thinking about them also. What's also interesting is besides these three generations, people are living longer and retirement ages are becoming postponed. So you have other generations to worry about. There are the baby boomers who are still in the offices, and if there's anyone in the audience, don't sort of beat me up after this. But these are people who were born between 1946 to 1955. So, if they're in the organizations, they're probably in very serious senior roles and very important. And in some companies, you will also still find what we call the traditionalists. So, people who were born before 1946 because they're healthy, they don't want to retire, and they might have positions, especially if it's a family business that you're working with, or they might be on your, board of advisors, etc. So all of these generations are working together in your workplace, and very important, especially when you consider the other transformations that are happening. You have to think about the implications of technology for all of these different people. So that's the research that we got interested in at the Emerging Markets Institute, and I'm going to share some parts of that which are relevant to today's conversation. And just to think a little bit more about Gen Z, the youngest of the people that we will be talking about today, they're probably right now preparing for summer holidays and thinking about the next academic year to come, etc. They're not aware of the consternation that they're causing in boardrooms all over the world. Everywhere CEOs are asking their HR directors and probably their CFOs and other people like all of you in the audience as to, is the workplace, is our office Gen Z ready? And that's a relevant question to be asking because, like I said, it's a question that's going to become your big problem very quickly. Right? It is important because all of these different generations that are working together in your workplace have very different experiences with technology, and they also have very different expectations from technology, very different expectations about what they want to see in the workplace. And this is what we became interested in. A few years back, we brought out some research on millennials, and we found that people found that very interesting. We busted a lot of myths about, how entitled they are and how they don't want to work very hard, etc. And we realized that actually these people know exactly what they want. We just have to find the right way to address those issues. And this year, early 2020, 2017, we brought out our latest research that also factored in Generation Z and Generation X. So this series that we called the Generation series, we focused on three basic aspects: on workplace culture, what is going to change in the workplace as all of these different generations work together. The second aspect was on leadership. What can we expect in terms of how these different people want to lead or want to be led? And finally, the implications from technology. How ready are we to address all of their requirements, or how unready are we, which unfortunately seems to be the case, as I'll tell you a little bit more. So from the technological standpoint, we focused on the last part. So what we did was we conducted a survey of over 18,000 people from the three youngest generations, which we think are most relevant right now. And these people were from some 19 different countries all over the world, from the most developed countries on the one side to the emerging economies that we're interested in. And we asked them a series of questions. From the standpoint of technology and the future workplace, the questions were on these three areas. So first of all, what are the expectations of how technology should shape the future of the workplace similar across generations or not? Is everyone thinking the same way about what they want? And then, if they're not, how can the workplace be designed to integrate multi-generational expectations? Tom mentioned that one of the big challenges you're going to have with robotics and everything else that's coming up now is to be able to retain talent, to attract them and manage them and retain them. And so it's important to understand how are we going to integrate all of the expectations of these different generations. And finally, what do these different generations look for in a future employer from the standpoint of technology? Are you going to be attractive to the people you're trying to bring into your companies or not? Now, I'm going to pick on a few key insights that I think will be interesting from the point of view of this conversation. Of course, if you're interested in the entire research, then there is a link that we can share with you. And I will also make you feel better and say that my slides are much simpler. So, so you're not going to be too worried about the break that is being a little bit delayed because we started a little later. So the first question, and of course there were many different smaller questions that were the basis of these, but I'm picking up a few. We started by asking, is technology a hindrance to work life? There are lots of noises about how so much is happening, and as you said, people are concerned about these changes that are coming in. We're not really ready, and so much is being shoved at us. Is too much technology actually becoming a hindrance? Probably, much as we expected, most people said no. It's actually technology is still considered an enabler, a helper, rather than a hindrance. But do note that the people who were most gung-ho about technology being an enabler and a helper were actually Gen X, not so much Gen Y and Gen Z. Small differences, but still an important one to note because it's slightly counterintuitive. You expect the younger ones to be more gung-ho about technology typically. Related question on, is technology a hindrance to your personal life? So does it matter that, now you're on the beach on a Sunday, your boss can reach you, and even worse, even if he's only making you a WhatsApp call, you might still need a jacket at the beach because now he might pick the video option on the WhatsApp call. So, is technology really becoming a hindrance in your work life? And then again, as expected, most people said no. They still consider it to be something that helps their work lives. But again, do note that Gen X, the oldest among the generations that we surveyed, were the ones who were most gung-ho about technology actually being a helper rather than a hindrance. Now, one reason for this might, of course, be that definitions of what technology really is are very different across generations, right? What I might consider high tech is probably really blasé and doesn't even merit being called technology where my daughter is concerned, right? So hence those changes matter. I always say that we talk about Gen Y and Gen Z being digitally native, but with Gen Z they are digitally native in the most extreme sense of the term, in the sense that they are actually completely helpless in a non-digital standpoint, right? In a non-digital world. And these are people we're talking about when we say that now you have to integrate them into your workforce. And how are you going to manage that? One aspect that always gets talked about when we talk about positive changes that technology have incorporated is, of course, flexible working hours and job locations. You probably can't read the questions out there, but what we asked them was that, do you think that, in the next 10 years or so, what is one of the areas that will be most offering of an opportunity to you in terms of what technology has done to change things? And they all spoke about flexible work hours and flexible workplaces, work locations. In Singapore, this is still something that we are trying to tell people that they need to do more of. So if you're not doing this, you're going to need to change that very quickly, because they expect that this is something that they'll all be able to factor into their future work decisions. So you're not going to be a very attractive employer if you don't pay some attention to the fact that this is an assumption that most generations are making. It's something that's very important to us as a provider of education, online versus in-person professional training and development. And the previous speaker spoke about the importance for training and development. So it was interesting to us to ask, and again, you can't read the question, so let me tell you what we asked. The first question really was about if online training was available, would you opt for it or not? So as expected, most people across Generation Z, Generation Y, both the working and the students among Generation Y and Generation X, everybody said yes. When I say everybody, more than 50% said yes, I'd opt for this. The next question we asked was, if you had a choice between having someone teach you in person, so classroom training, and online training, which one would you pick? Interestingly, everybody, a vast majority among all the generations, picked in-person training. And interestingly, the ones who said among these three generations, the ones who were most in favor of being able to, of maybe picking online training, were actually Gen X, not Gen Z. So Gen Z and Gen Y actually still want in-person training more than online training, which is quite interesting. And again, I think it busts some myths and some ideas that you might have. Of course, online training is here to stay. We can't get away from that because of flexibility. And I think that's probably why, and we did some further research to understand this, that's probably why Gen X is actually saying that out of the three generations, the one most likely to pick online training or virtual training versus in-person classroom training is Gen X. And that's not to do so much with what the mode of training that they prefer. It's probably more about having really busy calendars, and so this is the only one that fits in. I can't get away for a full day, so then I'll opt for the online training. But interesting to note that this again might be slightly counterintuitive. We asked about workplace technology. What technology are you actually using in your workplace? This question was, of course, only directed at Gen Y professionals and Gen X, because we're not asking students yet. So we asked all of them that of all the many different kinds of options that are available to you, what is actually being used in your companies right now? As you can see, the ones on top, it's audio, video conferencing, e-learning, cloud computing. You have to look really far down to come to the topic of today's conversations about virtual reality, about robotics, artificial intelligence. Only about 3 to 5% of the people that we surveyed said that these were already being used in their workplaces. So to the point made by Wendy and Tom that, it's required, but very few companies really are doing this already. Now this becomes even more interesting when I show you the next slide, which talks about wish list. If you had a choice, what technology would you really want to see in your workplace? Now here, the situation's quite reversed. As you can see now, what they want right up on top is virtual reality, is artificial intelligence. So you can see there's a clear mismatch between what these three generations want in the workplace and what you're offering them right now. So it's something to think about. And then we looked at what is tops in terms of their wish list. I'm not sure how much you can see of the slides. Are you sort of generally able to see what the slides are saying? In any case, let me tell you, basically what came out among all the generations was virtual reality is tops of what they want to see in terms of what they think will transform the future of the workplace. And the tool that they think will be most useful, it was virtual reality, it was artificial intelligence. Again, important to remember that we're not offering enough of that in the workplace right now. We asked, are employers' digital capabilities important? So, much more general question. More than 70% of both Generation Y and Generation X said, yes, very important, must have. Then we asked how many of you feel that your companies today are digitally capable. Less than 40% in both generations felt comfortable about what their companies are doing in terms of being digitally capable. So that sounded interesting. We asked a little bit more to understand, is this really important? More than a quarter of all the responders said, yes, it's crucial that we bridge this gap in the digital capability that my employer offers me right now and what I think we desperately need to have. So very important. Now, some of the challenges that came up when we asked about this, some Tom has already mentioned. A lot of the responders spoke about the fact that, look, my company is waking up to the fact that we don't have what we need, and what they're doing then is they're going about it at a breakneck speed, introducing technology, wherever they can, and as a result, there's no integration. Lots of things are problematic. The other thing that came up, of course, was the fact that digital skills are in short supply. Everybody's running after the same talent. So here, what you might want to start thinking about is you don't have to hire everybody that you want to work with, right? We spoke about, there was conversation around Uberization of services. This is the gig economy. So let's get used to maybe having digital capabilities come in, skills come in, not as employees, but possibly as service providers. And that you really probably won't have a choice soon. So this is something you have to start thinking about. The other challenge that many responders spoke about, and I think that's relevant when I'm talking to a senior group of people like yourselves, because you're making decisions, they did talk about the fact that we don't necessarily have buy-in at the top levels. And so a lot of digital capabilities are brought in where it is most obvious to customers. So where there's customer interfaces where we're being made to look really digitally capable and with it. But actually, when the back office is concerned, there's not enough happening. That's something to think about. So I'm going to end with 3 quick slides in answer to the question, what technology do you think will revolutionize the workplace in the next 10 years? When we asked Gen X, this is what came up. Internet is still big among my generation. We still think it's the transformational tool, and this is where everything will happen. But as you can see, robotics, artificial intelligence, automation are definitely making their appearance felt. Now we switch to what Gen Y felt. And here you can see the internet is still there, but robots, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, automation, big data becoming as important, if not more important. So these guys are saying this is what you pay attention to. And then, of course, Gen Z, I'm sure you're probably expecting this. Internet is not quite the most transformational tool from their point of view. And this is certainly, as you can see, robots are where what we should be talking about. So, yes, the conversation you're having today is relevant, it is topical, and certainly very important to this generation. Before I end, if you do want more information on our reports, then there's a link you can look at. We're happy to share that, or you just pop in your card outside and we can get back to you on it. I'm also going to make a request that you do your little bit to contribute to the creation of knowledge. We have a little survey that we've quietly slipped into each of your folders in front of you. It's going to take exactly 3 minutes, sometime during the course of the day. Fill it up. It's rare that we have captive audiences like yourselves to whom we can address a question. This is on a different theme, but do take the time to answer that. All right. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to talking to you over coffee.